Welcome to the Josh Button Podcast, where we discuss health, wellness, and outliers from society. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Josh Button Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Jeff Patterson, lifelong martial artist, if I'm not mistaken, gym owner, general coach, and facilitator, but also author. And The Yielding Warrior is how I found you. And it fascinates me. I want to talk all about it, but I also want to know about your history and how you came into martial arts and why you ended up on this path in the first place. So please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Well, thanks for having me on. I was always, as a child, I was always intrigued by martial arts and wanted to do it. However, I was from a fairly low income single parent family and didn't really have an opportunity to do martial arts as a kid. And so in my teenage years, I got a job and I was able to pay for classes for myself. And I started doing martial arts. And I never had the intention at the time of it being a career path. I just always had an interest there. And I remember being about 19 years old and going to a boxing gym that was just a few blocks down the street here from my academy here in Portland, Oregon. And at a boxing gym, they run them a lot different than your traditional style fitness class where you'll have a teacher in front of a group of students. Usually at a boxing gym, there might be 4 or 5 coaches rolling around, and each one of those coaches might have a handful of fighters that they're working with. Well, at this one particular gym, one of the coaches there was a very well-known coach. He had created champions at both the amateur and the professional level, and I really wanted to get to spend some time with him, but his card was full. He wasn't taking on any new athletes. So I would always show up at the gym when I knew he was going to be there. I'd work hard. I'd try to get him to notice me. And finally, after following him around for about 4 or 5 months, he started giving me a few tips and showing me some stuff. And he said something to me after about 2 or 3 weeks of getting to work with him that changed my life forever, in that he said, "If you really wanna be a good boxer, you should start doing meditation and Tai Chi." Now, at the time, I'm this dumb 19-year-old kid who doesn't know much of anything, thinking Tai Chi's for, like, old people in the park, and how's this going to help me be a better fighter? And I started doing the practice, and not only has it changed my life in many ways, through the years, I've had over 26,000 students come through my physical location here at our academy, thousands more online, and I've heard hundreds of stories of how the meditative arts has positively influenced people's lives. And that's what's made me so passionate about trying to get the message out there and teach the meditative arts.
So how old were you when you went into that boxing gym?
I was 19.
And you started doing Tai Chi right away at his advice?
Pretty soon after, maybe about 6 months after I started there.
Tai Chi is one of those things that I've seen, like, you can imagine in the parks in New York when I lived there and Los Angeles, but I never really got hands on, never got any experience with it. So what is it really? It's an enveloping, so to speak.
Well, Tai Chi is one of the meditative arts. And when I talk about the meditative arts, I'm kind of grouping together movement practices, sitting practices, standing practices, breath work, philosophical concepts. When anytime somebody comes to a meditative practice, they usually follow one of 5 paths. You have more of the physical development path, which is why a lot of athletes practice the meditative arts to help improve their performance and their timing and their mind body connection and be able to get into that mental state that allows them to get into flow. You have the therapeutic side of the practice, which is good for our longevity and our overall health and wellness. There's the medical side of the practice, which, Qigong's been around for almost 5,000 years, and all of Chinese medicine is based off of Qigong theory. There's the philosophical side of the practice, which has always been a passion of mine. And the reason why I'm so drawn to it is that it helps expand your peripheral vision so you see things from multiple angles and helps you be more strategic in pretty much anything you do in life. And then lastly, there's the spiritual path. And so anytime somebody is coming to the meditative arts, they might follow one or a combination of a couple of these. And then we would integrate different practices from the Tai Chi, the Qigong, the sitting meditation, standing meditation, philosophical practices to help support that path. And Tai Chi originally was created as a martial art, and what happened was is there's the story goes is that there's this gentleman called Buddha Dhammo who came over from India and saw all of these monks who were all broken and beat up because they'd been doing martial arts and their bodies were just not doing well. And so he integrated what they call marrow washing and muscle tendon changing exercises, these qigong practices that help them be more healthy. And that's kind of how Tai Chi started on the path of more of the health oriented side of the practice. And nowadays, if you go around, that probably 95% of the people out there teaching Tai Chi don't even know how to use it as a martial art. They're just doing it for the health benefits.
Like a recovery aid and strengthening kind of exercise?
Yes, both.
So I guess in a sense of moving meditation, is this something that you're visualizing while you do it, or is this something that you're kind of just letting whatever thought processes occur, like a regular meditation, and observing?
There are different visualizations with the practice. With doing, for example, a Tai Chi form, a lot of times you're visualizing where you want to put the intent or the power, or you're understanding how you want to yield when this power or intent is coming towards you. And so there is some of that, but then there's also the space for just being quiet and trying to listen to what's going on. And that's kind of what, one of the things with any meditative practice, whether you're doing a sitting or a movement practice or breath work, is just being more in tune and spending time in that present state of awareness. So you start to see things with a little bit more detail.
Right. Now, I've really been drawn to, and I'm fascinated by breath work in itself. I got really deep into Wim Hof and then different, yogi breaths just through different individuals. And I found these sessions to be amazing. And each had different benefits. And I could go into that for hours. But I also started to apply this to like a tightrope exercise that I do. I walk a slack line, and I don't use the slack line for the tricks or the jumping around, but just for a focusing on on my one spot ahead of my vision, and then meditating, and you're just kind of letting it go and letting the movement work on that line. So is this similar? If I were to apply Tai Chi movements on in that, would that work?
I think that is more of what I would call working on developing your present state in activities that you're doing. Whereas a movement meditation is not something where there are things from outside of your control that can disturb what you're doing. Whereas when you're doing a Tai Chi form, you're on a flat surface most of the time, and you don't have to worry about slipping on the gravel, or you don't have to worry about, stepping off of a curb. And your idea is to tap into this pre-sequenced movement that helps you through repetition, 1,000, 10,000 repetitions, where you start to almost get into this zone, if you will. And now your energy is carrying you through the movement, and you're able to be very present in the movement and just observe. You're not having to try to, I hear a lot of people say, or when I'm running through a mountain trail or I'm skiing down the slope, that's my meditation. And while there are some meditative elements to that, there's a lot of external stimuli that you have to be paying attention to in order to stay safe. And when this is happening, the meditative arts is often looked at and referred to as the internal arts. And the reason they're called the internal arts is because when you're in those focused states of meditation, we're turning our intent inward. And when you're doing activities that focus and make you look outward, there are some connections, but there is that distinct element that kind of takes it apart from meditation as well.
Yeah, like stabilizing and kind of just self-preservation in a sense.
Yes.
So how does the practice in itself of going inward facilitate and help us in something where we are heightened or are on focus on our partners, like in a sparring situation in boxing or jujitsu or any of the other martial arts?
There's so many different ways that developing this heightened awareness, I think, can influence you in really any area of your life. I've broken down 5 underlying principles of the meditative arts, and I call them the 5 regulations. And by having a good understanding of these, you'll see how the meditative arts can start to influence anything you do. And briefly, I'll kind of talk about what each of them are. They're regulating the body, regulating the breath, regulating the mind, regulating the energy, and regulating the spirit. Regulating the body is where we usually begin. It's the easiest one to start with. And the idea is that we're just paying attention of our muscular tension and our skeletal alignment. You know, you think about a time when maybe you're sitting down at your computer and you've been there 3 or 4 hours and your shoulders are rounded forward and your neck's feeling stiff and you're feeling a little bit lethargic. And then another time when the most important person in your world walks in the room and your body perks up and you feel like you're on top of the world. Well, these 2 different energetic states we're in 100% control of all day, every day, but how are we using our awareness to maintain those different energy levels? So regulating the body is an important element of the practice. And on a little bit of a deeper level of regulating the body is maintaining some sort of muscular structure and flexibility in the body, eating a healthy diet so we can keep our energy levels up and getting an appropriate amount of sleep. All of these things are kind of fall into that body regulation category. Then we have regulating the breath. And regulating the breath is an extremely deep topic, and often Qigong is referred to as the science of the breath because there's hundreds of different breathing strategies, and we can do these to get different mental, physical, and emotional outcomes. And so, because there's so many different breathing strategies, we kind of broadly categorize them in Qigong into yin methods and yang methods. Yin methods are often deeper, more holistic style of breathing meditations. And an example of a yin breath would be if you ever listen to somebody sleep, you'll notice that they have longer inhales and shorter exhales. And this is the body's natural way of bringing our conscious mind into our subconscious mind, which is where we are when we're sleeping and dreaming. And so, if we want to emulate this style of energetic expression in our meditative practice, we can do longer inhales, soft retentions at the end of the inhale, and shorter exhales. And that'll help bring the energy inward, which is great for stress reduction, dealing with anxiety, with panic attacks, for boosting our creativity. There's lots of reasons why we would focus on this. Then
Sorry. King,
it's all good.
down.
All right. So then we have the external side or the yang side of the breath. And on this side of the breath, it's more aggressive. It's kind of like if you've ever had to push your car, you pick up something heavy, your natural instinct is to exhale, put tension in the breath, and make the breath audible. And this is how we generate that expansive energy. So when you start learning how to use the breath strategically like this, we can use it to adjust our physical, mental, and emotional outcomes throughout the day. Then we have regulating the mind. And this is something that you'll be working on for the rest of your life if you take on a meditation practice. And one of the most common things I'll hear people say when they come to meditation and they want to take on the practice is that I've tried the practice before, but it just didn't work for me. I couldn't quiet my mind. And somewhere along the way, people got this misguided idea that in order to be successful with meditation, you have to reach this state of nirvana where nothing bothers you. And, they couldn't be further from the truth. The idea with meditation is that if I'm doing a movement practice or a sitting meditation and I'm there for 20 minutes, if I get distracted 50 times during that session, every time I get distracted, I notice the imbalance. I make the adjustment with my movement, my breath, and my posture to come back to center. Now I just got 50 repetitions on how to be distracted and come back to focus. And if you do that every day, every month, every year, you start to develop this power and this ability to find that center. in any chaos that gets thrown your way. And so this is a very powerful idea to understand. There's this old Chinese story about these two old monks who are walking down this dirt road after a huge rainstorm, and they come up to this big mud puddle. And on the other side of the puddle is this beautiful little girl, and she's standing there in a white dress, but she's crying. And the older of the two monks, he hollers across the puddle and says, "Is everything okay? Can we help you?" And she says, "I need to be somewhere, but if I walk across this puddle, I'm going to get my dress all dirty." So the older monk, he rolls up his pant legs and he walks across the puddle, picks her up, puts her on his back, takes her to the other side, sets her down, and she's off on her way. Well, him and the younger monk are walking a couple miles further down the road. And finally, the younger monk is just furious and he says, "You know, we're not supposed to touch girls, but you did back there at the puddle." And the older monk looks down and says, "I left that girl back at the puddle. Why are you still carrying her around?" And how many times in life do we got to get 2 miles down the muddy road before we realize we need to let that stuff go? And so learning how to regulate the mind is a very valuable lesson in the meditative arts. Then we have regulating the energy. And this is an extremely deep topic and something that we could literally talk for hours about. But the basic idea is once you've reached a competent level in regulating the body, the breath, and the mind, we now have the tools and the ability to regulate the energy in the body, to lead it inward, to extend it outward, to circulate it in the body, to get different outcomes with our practice. And then the fifth and final regulation is regulating the spirit. And this is very profound and something that meditation practitioners will spend their entire life's journey working towards. But the basic idea is think about when you, the average time when you get excited, your body tends to get tense as well. You know, you start to get a little bit on edge, if you will, because you're starting to feel that excitement and that energy running through you. Well, when we start learning how to control the spirit, we learn how to elevate that energy and build up that excitement, but at the same time be settled and rooted so that body is relaxed and is able to flow. And this is what athletes a lot of times refer to as that flow state, where they're very relaxed and very in time, but their energy is extremely heightened and they're very present. So regulating the spirit has many applications on a physical and then more of a kind of a spiritual side as well. So with these five regulations, you can see that, you know, no matter why you're being drawn to the meditative arts, there's many reasons how it can help positively influence your life.
And infinitely as well.
Yes.
So, in your own personal jujitsu journey, at what point, at what belt level, at what experience level did you realize, wow, this is going to actually really benefit my practice in that regard just as much as it is in the rest of your life?
You know, the idea of yielding, which is something that comes from the meditative arts, and you know, my last book called The Yielding Warrior is all about yielding, and that concept is very much a part of jujitsu. And in jujitsu, if you try to fight every battle, you're going to lose every battle when somebody's bigger and stronger than you. So you've got to learn how to yield. And yielding is very valuable. And that's one of the first things that I learned when doing Tai Chi is that this has some substance behind it. And this is something that is used in any physical confrontation in any sport. In fact, one of my old teachers back in, it might have been the 70s or the 80s, I'm not sure, it's been a while, but he was working with the Dallas Cowboys linemen, teaching them about how to yield because it was so valuable and how to redirect that energy and get to where they need to go. And so it, you know, it can be used in just many different areas.
Where did you get your black belt?
I got my black belt from Higan Machado, but I've also spent a lot of time training with Master Pedro Sauer, who's been a big influence as well.
Awesome. Awesome. So, you've born and raised in Portland?
I was born in Southern California. I've been in Portland since about 91, I think.
Whereabouts in Southern California?
Redlands?
Nice. I just came back to Florida from California during COVID. It's an interesting time period over there for sure.
Yeah.
So, what led you to jujitsu? You started with boxing?
Yeah. I started with Kempo and kickboxing. And then when I moved up to Portland, I started getting into boxing, and then that same boxing coach who turned me on to, Tai Chi and the meditative arts, he also started opening up avenues for me to learn Eskrima and look at the Kali and look at the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and that's where I really started realizing that the meditative and the martial arts were going to be kind of my life practice. I remember him telling me, I was the first kid in my whole extended family to go through college, and I remember my family thinking, "Oh, he's gonna go get some big important job and do something, whatever," and, uh, I remember my old coach telling me, he's like, "You wanna create a life and not make a living." And while I had people that, I graduated, I got 2 degrees in less than 4 years. I had people that were going out and getting good jobs right out of school. And here I am, just scraping by trying to teach the martial and meditative arts, just doing what I can to put some food on my plate. And I just knew that, even if I didn't make much, if I was doing what I loved, that was my path. And so there was never a plan B, if you will. There was never something else. It was just I wanted to follow my passion, and I never would have realized that it would have turned into what it has. I mean, here at my academy, I've got 15 employees. It's one of the biggest schools in the Pacific Northwest, if not the biggest. And, and all my online programs and books, that was never even in the vision. I didn't know that was part of it, but there's something to be said for sticking with your passion and following your heart.
Now, for our listeners, tell us everything about your academy, what classes you have, what you're offering, and in what order did you add them? Where did you start?
Well, we have 4 adult programs. So we have our Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu program. We have our striking program where we do Muay Thai and Western boxing. We have our Eskrima program, and then we have our meditative arts program where we do Tai Chi and Qigong and breath work and study philosophy and that kind of thing. Ever since I started my academy back in 1994, we've had all of those programs. Again, back then, I was not as skillful of a teacher as I have developed into, but I had always been passionate about all those areas and just continued to develop them through the years.
Did you start the academy before you got your black belt, or had you already achieved that?
I did start the academy before I got my black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, yes.
Awesome. So, what were you doing for training when you started your academy? Were you going elsewhere to train and then coming back and teaching as well, or were you just continuing your journey in house?
Yeah, so for my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, it was a bit of a challenge because back then there was no black belts in the Portland, Vancouver metro area. So I remember when we first started training, me and my training partner, we were like, "Hey, there's this Hickson Gracie blue belt out in Gresham. We got to go train with him," because we were so stoked that somebody had been training with Hickson, and so we, I had to travel around. I went back to the East Coast. I trained down in LA. I'd just kind of go and travel. And that's why it took me 17 years to get my first black belt. So in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, because it was a while before there was any black belts around the area.
Yeah, I love these stories. The kids have absolutely no idea how good they have it. Jiu-Jitsu academies now, it seems like they're popping up everywhere. It's just the basics is readily available online. You can resource things all over the place. But talking to some of the OGs, the old school guys, if you will, you guys really had to kick and scratch just to get, training or legitimate training and to stay on the process. So I commend you all for doing it. And what is now was created by people that were going out of their way back then. So you're training, you're traveling around to train, you open your academy, and did you know right away that this was it? This is what you were going to stick with, or did you think you were potentially going to go back to the workforce or try to go back to the workforce?
Yeah, I always knew this was what I was going to do. I really, I had no plan B. However, I do remember, and granted, this was back in the early 90s, but I remember telling myself, if I could just make $30,000 a year doing what I love to do, which I wasn't even there yet at that point, uh, if I could just make that, I'd be happy. I don't need to make 100,000 a year. I don't need the money. I just need to do what I love to do. And again, it's nice now. I've got employees who are supporting their family off of our academy here, and so I just didn't even realize that that was an option back then. I just knew I was following it because I love doing it.
Awesome. I found myself in a similar position, walking away from a ton of money and working 9 to 5 every Monday through Friday and grinding it out in New York City and realizing, like, what is this existence? I've got money, but I'm just going to spend whatever I make, or I'm just going to be exhausted and tired and trying to play catch up to my like health and wellness and my life, and really wanted to do something I enjoyed as well. And then lo and behold, realize there's certain things out there that, hey, I might not ever want to retire from if I'm doing those. So it's another way to think about life. And I commend all you guys that have taken that path. You do you pursue any other education as far as other martial arts, or are you just solely teaching?
I teach and I'm a very avid learner, read and listen to podcasts. I'm actually going down to a workshop here on Sunday to Vegas. I travel around anytime somebody's got something that I think is of value and I want to learn. I'm always growing and trying to learn. And I feel like, that's part of what has come from, I'll never forget being at the first boxing gym that I ever went to. Here I am, this 19-year-old kid starting in boxing, and some of these kids that were my age and a little bit older that I was sparring with had been doing it since they were 8, and I was just getting it handed to me, right? And I had to work hard, and I had to stay, I had to go in there to just get to where I could survive with some of these guys, and it put this fire in me to, like, find my potential. And that fire now, obviously, I'm not in the ring boxing at my age, but that fire now is in my business and in how trying to help people and how can I get this message out there to show people the value of the meditative arts. And I'm still teaching the martial arts as well, but I'm really kind of putting a lot of my time and energy into the meditative practices because while it's always been fun to take somebody to a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competition or an MMA fight and have them do well, it really touches your heart when somebody comes to the meditative practice and they say that, this practice changed their life and they used to have panic attacks and now they feel comfortable walking into a grocery store, or they were working through cancer and this practice helped keep them positive and help them heal through their practice, whatever that was. And you hear those stories, that's like, man, that's just really makes you feel good to be able to be part of that, and so I've just been putting a lot of my time there.
Yeah, it sounds very fulfilling, and something that you should be proud of and would definitely be influential in actually pursuing that further. You touched on something interesting for me. Do you remember acknowledging that place where you're like, all right, I'm pretty good at jujitsu. I'm pretty good at my martial arts. But now I've gotten to the point where these kids that I've trained for 8 years, 9 years, or have grown up doing this are going to be superior. Whether they're passing me up now, whether they've already passed me up, I can't really compete with them anymore. Did you find that to be challenging? That it was a new humbling experience? Was it something that came to you effortlessly and easily? And were there any tips and tools that you give other midlife rollers, so to speak, when they encounter that situation?
I think that one of the things that's always been part of the fire and part of the motivation there is that I've always kept growing. I've always kept learning. And so if I can help them strategically and to see things mentally that can help improve their game, even though maybe they're stronger than me and they're faster than me, and if I can help them see things from a different angle to improve their skill, I don't have to be stronger or faster than them. I can still be of value to them in some way or another. And some of my most respected teachers that I've had in my life, I never even got to the point with some of them where I was able to play with them on the mat because they were already so much further along in years than me. But I got more value out of training with them than many of the teachers who I actually got to get on the mat and sweat with. And so, seeing that and having those role models and those examples in my life made that transition a little easier when that was something that kind of hit home for me.
Yeah. Martial arts in itself is a very humbling experience. And you're humbled in the beginning, you're humbled in the end, I'm sure, in different ways. But like you said, we do all facilitate one another if we're open to learning. And my instructor, the owner of our academy here, puts it pretty bluntly. He's like, look, you can learn something from everybody. It really, if you're really open and you're paying attention, you shouldn't be putting the walls up or shutting people down. You should be experiencing this with everybody and being open to learning from everyone. So in your academy now, how many do you have active, like competitive, like competition team? Do you have guys that are getting out there a lot?
Yeah, yeah, we have a pretty active Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competition going on. We're actually holding a smoker here next month where we're having some kickboxing matches here at the academy, and so, yeah, we dabble in it a little bit.
Is that an in-house thing?
Yeah.
Awesome. So you'll set up, are you setting up like a tournament style, a bracket, or are you just
No, it's just gonna be a fight card where people will come in and they'll have 1 fight per.
awesome? So, kids program versus adults program, you guys pretty well rounded. You have a big kids program, big adult program.
We're mostly adults. We've got about 450 active members right now, and I would say maybe 60 of those are in our kids program.
Wow. So you got the like the opposite ratio of most of the places that I've trained so far. The kids programs are booming here, and the adults tend to be the group that is hit or miss. They'll come and go, and we lose people left and right. It seems like, but and it's very interesting how much it's grown, regardless across the board.
Yeah, when I started my academy back in '94, there was one other academy in the whole Portland, Vancouver metro area doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai, and man, now there's probably close to 100 if you count like all the little schools that are everywhere, and so it's really blown up in the last 30 years for sure.
Yeah. Do you do seminars? Do you travel and do seminars elsewhere?
Yes. Yeah.
Do you have anything coming up?
I don't have anything right now on the horizon. I don't do a lot of them.
So I know you do have another book coming out though, or that you're working on, The Yielding Athlete.
Yes.
What's that about?
So the Yielding Athlete is kind of a sequel to the Yielding Warrior. So in the Yielding Warrior, I touch on the philosophical concepts of yielding and how to apply it physically, mentally, and emotionally. And we get into some of the athletic benefits there. With physical yielding, it's the idea that I push you, you push me, whoever's the bigger, stronger person with the most leverage eventually is going to push the other person over. But with yielding, instead of us trying to see who the bigger meathead is, when you push me, I get out of the way of that force. And now I can respond with less effort. And so it's obvious how this is beneficial in athletics and martial arts because you're always going to come up against bigger, stronger athletes. And in order to be good at physical yielding, a lot of things have to come into play. You need to be well rooted. The lower part of your body needs to be strong and flexible so you could change your sensory equilibrium without getting tight. The body has to be relaxed. The mind has to be calm. Breath has to be even and smooth. And so it's really a lifetime journey to master these skills. However, from day one, by integrating a meditative practice into your life, you start to see these things with more clarity and not only inside yourself, but also in other people. And this is where we're moving into what I call mental yielding. So if you and I are having a conversation and I recognize some sort of imbalance from something was said, it's a lot easier to adjust the conversation and keep us in our harmonious place than if I'm not paying attention to that. And pretty soon I'm so far off track, you want to knock me upside the head. So, learning how to use yielding in all of our interactions is extremely powerful. One of my longtime meditation teachers, he always says, with yielding, you can often make your enemies your friends, but without yielding, often your friends will become your enemies. And this idea of learning how to use yielding in our interactions helps us, one, be more considerate, which is something we could all do more of. And two, it allows us to be strategic to guide these interactions and conversations to a positive outcome with the least amount of resistance. And this is good for relationships, sales, negotiations. I mean, there's so many ways that we can apply this idea. Then the third pillar of yielding is emotional yielding. And emotional yielding is very much like mental yielding, but with our own interpersonal conflicts. So you think about when something happens to us, we'll often respond and go down this path. And we might get an hour, a day, a week down the road and realize, maybe that wasn't the best choice. But with yielding and this heightened awareness that we gain through practicing the meditative arts, it allows us to step back, be more centered, not let our emotions get involved, analyze what's going on, and often make a more educated choice about how to move forward that can save us a lot of heartache on the other side. I've been explaining this idea of yielding now for many years, running the academy for quite a while now. One of the most common things I'll hear people say is yielding makes a lot of sense. And in fact, I do yielding all the time. Well, I would agree in that I think everybody does some degree of yielding all the time, whether they label it that or not. However, it's kind of like if you or I were to walk into a crime scene with a detective who's been on the job for 30 years, I guarantee you that person would see things about the series of events and the timeline that I know at least I would have no clue of. And the meditative arts helps us see things inside of ourselves and inside of other people that I truly believe most people will go through life and never have any clue of without a practice like this in their life. Now, that's kind of like the basic concept of yielding. In The Yielding Athlete, the book, I've broken down these concepts about how to apply them physically, mentally, emotionally towards different areas of an athlete's career and their mindset to how to get to that next level. There's so many professional athletes these days that are turning to the meditative arts because they understand that there is a lot of value there. And so I want to train athletes to show them how they can use this to get that extra few percentage points. If you already have an athlete who's 92, 93% of their potential, you're not going to change their game, 50%, but 3% at that level makes a huge difference, or even 2%, a half a percent, for some of those. You talk about somebody like Michael Jordan, you get him a half percent better.
Yeah.
That's a big deal, right? So understanding how these practices can help influence your career and your longevity and your mindset through the practice is invaluable for an athlete.
Have you noticed I don't want to call it a trend, but the rise in the market for actual mindset coaches, for athletes mindset coaching?
Well, yes, you go back 30 years and there wasn't anything like that. Yeah, there's a lot more out there today for sure.
Yeah, I was just making a note about that the other day with a friend of mine. We were talking about it. It's like, wait a minute. And I know several Jiu-Jitsu competitors, and I know different NBA people that I was reading an article about that are all tapping into this mindset coaching and all have universally across the board said, I've seen definitive results. And it didn't take long either. It was tapping into a certain couple things. And then all of a sudden they realized that their focus was different, that their performance was different. So, what is your advice for somebody who hasn't gone and gotten a mindset coach yet, but is an athlete, whether or not they're competing or they're going in for training and that is their competition? What is the first initial steps to adopting a practice or changing their life in a way so that they can adopt these practices?
From teaching for so many years, one of the biggest challenges that I've faced is showing people the value of having a consistent meditation practice in their life and getting them on board with using it so they can experience those benefits, whether they're in athletics or their personal life or for whatever reason they're coming to the practice. And I've come up with 3 things, I call them the 3 considerations that I like people to spend a little bit of time with when they come to the practice, because I feel like if they do, they're gonna be much more successful in seeing the outcome that they wanna get, whether they're an athlete or they're doing it for their physical or mental health. And the first one is, why is it that you're being drawn to this practice? Are you wanting to stay healthy to watch your grandkids grow up? Are you wanting to stay more mobile and be able to do things, activities in your body as you age? Or are you an athlete looking to improve your performance? Whatever that is for you, think about how that is of value to you, and then go a little bit deeper and think of 10 or 20 things in your life that will positively change if you accomplish that goal. If it makes you perform better on the field, and now instead of having a 5-year career, it improve your longevity, and now you have a 7, 8, 10-year career, how much is that going to change your life? Because you really want to have that fuel and that reason to do the practice. Then I like them to flip the coin and think about, if they don't accomplish this, what are 10 or 20 negative things that are going to happen? And how could that negatively influence them by not having this in their life? And then when they have that, this gives them that reason, if you will. So tomorrow morning, when the alarm goes off and it's time to get up and do your meditation practice, you're not tempted to hit the snooze button and say, I'll do it tomorrow. And what I see happen to people by doing this is that they go from the mindset that this practice is a chore that they have to do, to this mindset that this is something that I get to do because it's giving me all of these positive benefits in my life. And when they make that mental shift, it stops becoming a question as to if they're going to do their practice. It's when, and a lot of athletes already have this, but when they see that this will add value to what they're doing, they're the most fun ones to work with because they already have that discipline in them. It's not like getting somebody off of the couch and being like, hey man, you got to do this for 20 minutes a day, so it's having that why and that really good understanding of that is important. The second thing is, you have to approach the meditative arts with the understanding of consistency. And there's this story that I enjoy that addresses this idea very well. And it's about this old stonecutter who was very well known all over China. And he made these beautiful sculptures of animals and landscapes. And his work was so unique and so beautiful that anytime somebody would see it, they would just know it was his. Because of this, he'd have people from all around coming to train with him and apprentice with him to learn the trade. Well, every morning, this stonecutter, he'd start his day off by walking down to the river and meditating. And one day after his meditation session, he's walking along the river and he has this profound vision of this big 6 foot tall, mystical Chinese jade dragon. And he's so taken by this vision that he just knows this has to be his next project. So he spends the next few months searching all around looking for the perfect piece of jade for his new creation. Finally, when he finds the stone, he brings it back to his place and he spends the next period of time just sitting with the stone, day in and out, trying to feel the energy from the stone and envision how this dragon is going to soon appear. Finally, one day he starts working on the stone and he carefully places his chisel on the backside of the stone and starts tapping away with his hammer, hundreds, if not thousands of times a day to the exact same spot, and nothing changed. A few days went by and still nothing. A few more days went by and his apprentices started second guessing him, thinking, man, maybe he should try something else. This doesn't seem to be working. A few more days went by and finally he taps a stone and this big 3 foot section comes off the backside of the rock and creates a smooth, slightly curved line that's going to be part of the dragon's back. And one of his apprentices who was watching said, how did you know that that strike was going to break the stone? And the stonecutter replied, it wasn't that strike that broke the stone. It was the thousands of strikes before it that broke the stone. And with a bit of a discouraged tone on his voice, the apprentice said, but I've been watching you and there was no change, not even a crack. Why did you keep doing the same thing over and over again? And the stonecutter got down on one knee and he felt the smooth line that he just created. And he said, each strike was not wasted. The stone was changing beneath the surface. And even though we could not see it with the naked eye, not only was the stone changing, but so is the one who wields the hammer. And the reason why I resonate so much with this story is that this is the meditative arts. We're practicing these breathing techniques, these movement practices, these sitting meditations, studying these philosophical concepts, and we don't always see the change happening day to day. But through our consistent efforts, we're laying the foundation for us to bear fruits for the rest of our lives. And, so many times along my personal journey, I've had times where I'll have a teacher tell me or teach me something, and I'll think that I've got it figured out. And then 5 years later, I'll be like, oh, that's what he meant. I get it now. And having that seed, if I didn't put in the work during that 5 years, I never would have figured that out. And so approaching this practice with that understanding of consistency is invaluable. And then the third and final consideration is you need to have a guide. You have to have somebody in your corner that's going to help point you down the right path and show you what's going to help you for different scenarios. I've been studying the meditative arts now for 36 years, and I'm still just a student learning all the time. If you think that you're going to go sift through the millions of videos on YouTube or find an app and figure it all out, you're never going to get past the surface and you're going to waste a lot of time. I've had students come into the academy who have been self-taught and they've been training for 15, sometimes 20 years. And they realize that, there's students here that have only been here for 12 months that are deeper into their training than they are. And it's, our lives are short and your time is valuable. So having somebody in your corner is essential. So those three things, your why and your reasons for doing it, the understanding of consistency and having somebody in your corner, that's the first place to start, and if you do that, you're bound to be successful with the practice.
Awesome. How important is belief?
For sure. Comes with consistency. Feel like many times over, you'll see somebody practice their first day they come in, and they will maybe experience a deep level of relaxation, or they'll experience some positive benefits from the session. But then I'll see them a week later or 2 weeks later, and I'll ask, "How's your practice going?" And they're, I didn't practice since I was here last." And if they don't have that why, and they don't believe that this practice is going to help them accomplish that why, they're never gonna build the habit, and that's why I have them run through that exercise, because I feel like if they do run through that exercise, it helps enhance that belief and that understanding. And that's part of my job as a teacher as well, is to give them examples so they do believe. And today it's, like as you mentioned earlier, it's so easy to go out there now and hear all these stories of this athlete or that athlete or this performer or whatever that has taken on this practice and seen positive changes that have influenced their lives. There's all kinds of social proof out there. And in fact, there's even medical studies from the Harvard Medical School and the Mayo Clinic where there's proven science behind this stuff that it is working and that it does benefit you. And so I think there's a lot of resources out there to find that belief these days.
I couldn't agree more. It is something that you're going to develop with that consistent practice. When I first got into breath work, the first session was quite amazing. And it was definitely, what's the word for it? It was perception changing. But after weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, as different layers of this conscious awakening and this thing that would hit me over and over became apparent, I realized how much more I was influencing my biology and my performance and everything about it. And that's kind of what led me into meditation in itself. I tried meditation before breath work and I didn't really understand. It didn't settle with me until breath work. And then after breath work practice, it started to make sense and I could do breath work and then meditate. So you're online. People can come to you as a resource, as a coach online as well, correct?
Yes.
And where would they find you?
TheYieldingWarrior.com. I've got my books up on Amazon as well. You can get my books through my website. And then all the social channels. If you look up The Yielding Warrior, you'll find me there as well.
One last thing about meditation. Do you practice mantras? Do you have mantras? Do you suggest people develop their own or have their own mantras?
Yeah, I think mantras are a very valuable part of the practice, whether it's either through an actual sequence of words or even sounds. I think having that sound therapy is very important part of the practice. And in Qigong, we use the the sounds all the time.
External or internal, like vagus nerve stimulation, or are you talking about like hand pans and frequencies?
So Both. So some practices will work with subvocal sounds to just try to feel that more internally,
Mhm.
but then also with an audible sound like the ha sound, we'll make this where we feel that vibration and try to tap into that frequency.
Got it. Awesome. One last thing. I saw you promoting for gym owners that you're actually helping gym owners develop revenue streams outside of their own scheduling or within their scheduling. So, what is that informative book about, and how can people come and find that as well?
Yeah, so one of the things being in the martial arts industries for over 30 years, and you've probably experienced this with your own academy, is that the academies are busy from, maybe 5 to 9 or 4 to 9 in those evening hours. And with most martial arts studios, gyms, yoga studios, their average clientele, when we're talking about adults, not kids now, is 20s, 30s, and 40s. It's rare you'll see some face, even rare 60s and 70s are almost vacant and you never see it. And so here at my academy, with our internal arts program, it targets a different demographic. So we're not just focusing the 20s, 30s, and 40s somethings, is we're hitting those 50s, 60s, 70s, and even some 80-year-olds. And the great thing about this demographic is that they like coming in during the day when most martial arts academies and yoga studios are sitting idle. And so some of my busiest classes here at my academy are during the day for my meditative arts program. And there's a lot of benefits from this demographic. One is they're more settled in life. I have students in my meditation program that have been with me for 30 years. I can't say that about any other program I have here at the Academy. So you get people that are more settled. They love being in a positive community. They're doing something healthy for themselves to keep them more mobile and agile. And so this program is something that works really well with traditional martial arts and yoga studios in that it doesn't compete with their other programs. It only adds value for those of them that want to add the meditative practice into what they're doing, but then it also targets a whole new stream of customers that can come in. And, here at my academy, we only have 6 meditative arts classes a week, and it generates an extra $40,000 a month in additional revenue for the academy for 6 hours a week, and so this program is about showing other academies how to put together this system in their academy or studio.
Awesome. Awesome. So, people can find that as well at theyieldingwarrior.com, correct?
Yeah, you can get access to me there. You can schedule an appointment if you want to chat and see about what would be the best way to move forward from here.
Awesome. Jeff, this has been a pleasure, man. I appreciate your time and coming on and sharing everything. And I'm looking forward to your next book.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
That's theyieldingwarrior.com, everyone. Check it out. Lots more to learn there. And also, Jeff, your socials are great. There's lots of good restorative and informative posts on there about mindset, about meditation, and about sticking with your daily practices so that you can achieve similar results. So thanks again. I appreciate your time, and you guys have a good day.